Again, welcome to our webinar. This is a webinar on evaluating resources using the right source, the right time. So how do you evaluate library materials? I'm Erin Gould-Branson, and joining me is Kim Burton.
Hello.
And we'll go ahead and get started. I am going to turn off my webcam. It's distracting even to me, so I'm going to turn that off so that you can just focus on the content. All right. So what are our objectives in this webinar? Oh, well, first of all, I want to let you know this is a whole series really about evaluating resources. So we've got other webinars that were part of this series. You can see some of them are archived. You can go back and watch recordings of them. And then we do have another one coming up on August 7th. On a Tuesday, again, at 9 p.m. Eastern time. And it's about what do you do with things that you find on the internet. So if you want to learn more about evaluating resources, it's a really big topic. So that's why we've broken it down into these separate webinars to cover as much as we can. So please look for that and register if you're interested.
And Erin, I just wanted to mention that I put the link for captioning transcriptionist in the chat.
Thank you. All right, so our objectives in this particular webinar, what we're going to look at are questions, a set of questions that you can use to evaluate library resources. There are a lot of different tactics for evaluation, and we have a whole guide that goes over a few different, mentions a few different ways that you can evaluate a resource. But in this webinar session, we're going to look at a set of questions you can use to think critically about any resource that you find. And then later, Kim is going to talk about identifying appropriate resources for their intended use. So for instance, if you have an assignment, what would be appropriate? If you just need up-to-date current information on a topic, what would be appropriate there? So how to use, it's like using the right tool at the right time. You know, if you need a hammer, use a hammer. If you need a screwdriver, use a screwdriver. So we're going to talk about resources in that same kind of way. All right, so I'm going to start going through those questions that we can ask ourselves about a resource to evaluate it using an example. And this is the example I'm going to use. We're citing our sources. We're just showing you the citation for it, but I actually already have it open. So I'm going to go to that PDF and we'll just take a quick look at it. So here's the PDF of that article from the library databases. I did find it through the library. And I've got the first page here. It shows me the where it came from the Journal of Political Psychology. I've got all that. I've got the title. I've got all the different authors here. Great. And I can scroll through and see the whole article, and we'll talk about different parts of it as we move along. So let's start with those authors at the top. I've got a little screenshot here too, so I don't have to keep jumping back and forth. But we've got different authors listed, and then underneath each of their names, it tells what their affiliation is. So these are some of the questions you can ask yourself with a resource about the authors. What are their affiliations? I see Catherine Greenaway is with the University of Queensland. I've got the next one is at the University of Kent, and so on. So I've got all these different people, and I see that they're all affiliated with a university. I can even look up their name and their university and learn more about them and that place where they work, the university where they work. So let's look at that last person. I am going to go back to my PDF, so I hope will let me just quickly grab the name. Let's see here. Nyla from the University of Kansas. I'm going to grab all that actually and just copy it. I'm going to go over to my browser, and this is a great time to just use regular Google. So I have a Google search box right here. I'm just going to put her name and her affiliation in the Google search box, and I can see, yeah, she's a real person. Here's the Department of Psychology from the University of Kansas. Let me just open that up in a new tab. And I can see that she does work there. I can see her credentials. I could look at her entire CV here. I can see where she went to school and what degrees she has. So she's got a PhD. It's from 1986, but she has her PhD from Purdue University. So this is just giving me a little bit of an idea about the credentials of one of the authors. You don't have to do this for every single article that you find that you want to use for an assignment, but if you ever do have an article where, wow, this is, you know, maybe saying some different things than what I have been reading in similar research, maybe take a look at the authors. Maybe they are affiliated with universities that are kind of known for the research in an area, so maybe they're on the cutting edge, you know, if it's a school that's really well known. So like I'm thinking, you know, like Harvard Law School or something. You would want to maybe just take a look at that and think about what does that mean for this topic and for this article. All right, and you can do that with usually any author. Sometimes if it's a very old article, you may not find much about the author. They may no longer be living, and so they're not going to have a web presence. But that is just one tactic you can use to learn a little bit more about the research and where it came from. So we saw her qualifications. We could look up the other people. Another thing that's fun is to look at other publications. If we opened her CV, we would probably see other articles that she's co-written or written. And then that can actually just help you in general with research to then find other related articles if you are interested in that. All right, so we can also learn about the resource and evaluate it by looking at the publisher. Who is the publisher of this one? This is a journal called Political Psychology. We would want to pay attention, like I kind of already mentioned, to the publication date. That publication date is going to tell us if it's really old, maybe new research has come along that has added to this, this area, and maybe this is no longer as relevant as it once was. I was just talking to Kim before we started. I'm always trying to come up with new examples for things, and I was trying so hard to come up with another example of a resource that we would evaluate where maybe it wouldn't be a very up-to-date or current article. And the example I came up with is, you know, I don't know, maybe you've seen this lately that in like popular science magazines about how, well, dinosaurs actually had feathers. And it's not that people in the past, you know, we can't learn something from their old research, but that's just the nature of science and of scientific inquiry, even if it's, you know, social sciences, research in education, research in all fields. The more we learn, the more research gets informed by that, and then new research shows something new that we didn't know before. And it doesn't mean that we need to throw out the old research and we can't learn anything from it. It's just that it may not be the most accurate anymore because we learn more things. That's the nature of science, is that we're always learning more. So anyway, publication dates are important because if it's getting old, well, we may have new research that adds to the dialogue that may disprove something entirely from the past, or may just add to it, add to the body of knowledge. So I know in a lot of Walden assignments, and if you are a doctoral student at Walden, you're probably aware that you always want to focus on current research, which is usually defined as being from the last 5 years. That's not an arbitrary thing. There is a reason why Walden wants students to focus on current research, and that's why, because research is always evolving. And then also we want to think about, you know, what kind of publication is this? I mentioned popular scientific magazines that are talking about dinosaurs with feathers. And there are other types of publications out there. Some of them are Popular sources, meaning not that they're so popular, everyone's reading them. A lot of people are reading them maybe, but they're intended for a general audience. That's what we mean by popular sources. They're intended for anyone. They might be a magazine that's sitting in your doctor's office or your dentist's office. And then there are things that are considered scholarly publications. And one subset of scholarly publications are peer-reviewed journals. You may be familiar with peer review. And again, that's often a requirement for your assignments at Walden is, they want you to use peer-reviewed current research. Again, that's not arbitrary. There's a reason for that. Because those peer-reviewed research articles, they have been vetted by other experts in that field so that the other experts are saying, yeah, this is good research. They used a good methodology. We can reliably trust the conclusions that they're coming to in this research. And that's the importance of peer review, that other experts have looked at it. So if we wanted to verify if this is peer reviewed or not, I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So I've got the name of the journal, and peer review is determined at the journal level. So this journal, Political Psychology, either they have peers review everything that they publish, other experts in the field reviewing the articles before they get published, or they don't. It's one or the other. It's not like they're going to say, oh, we've got 20 articles this month being submitted. We'll put these 10 through the peer review process, but these other 10, we'll just let them slide. No, they either peer review everything or they don't. So let's look up that journal, and that will tell us if this article was peer reviewed, if the journal uses that peer review process or not. And the way to do that, I'm going to go to the library homepage. The way to do that, you can go to Start Your Research. And I'll show you another way to do this in just a moment. And we named it by what it does. We go to Start Your Research, and then we click on the actual tool that we use is called Ulrichs, and it verifies peer review. So we named it Ulrichs Verify Peer Review, just to remind you what it does. This is all that you're going to use this tool for. This is all that you would want Ulrichs for, is to verify peer review. And all it does, it's a tool where it lists information about journals, including if they're peer reviewed or not. So let me go ahead and click on that. And it's great that on our little search box here that we created, we also remind you that you want to look up the title of the journal and not the article, again, because either this journal uses peer review or it doesn't. And it shows us exactly what we're looking for here. We want the little referee shirt in the referee shirt icon or column, because refereed is a synonym for peer reviewed. I already forgot the name of the journal. We want to look up political psychology. There we go. So let me just type that in. And click search. And it is going to give me a whole listing of journals. It's just bringing me to the alphabetical list of journals where it's finding political psychology. So I'm going to see other journals listed. Sometimes students think that they've done something wrong because it gives you a whole long list. It doesn't just show you the one that you searched for. It's fine. I see it right here. It does list it multiple times because it is available in lots of different formats. The format doesn't matter. Again, either they use peer review or they don't. And for this one, I see the referee shirt. So they do use peer review, which there we go. I know that this article went through that peer review process. So other experts read it and said they used they did good research. All right, so let's move on from publisher information to the content. Now this is where things get a little sticky because this isn't as clear cut as is it peer reviewed or not. What are we talking about when we say authoritative and supported by facts? Is the content authoritative? Is it supported by facts? Well, let's just briefly take a look through the article itself. I do see that they are citing other sources. This first citation actually is citing some of the very authors of this article. So I would want to make sure they're citing other people than themselves, but then they're citing other people, not just themselves. So they are supporting what they're saying with facts. They're supporting what they're saying with other research, backing up, just like you do when you are making a point and backing it up with others' research. So I see lots of citations here. And then let me just go down to the bottom and show you that they also provide a works cited. So I do have all of anything that they cited here, I could go look up to and see what, is that really what they said? Is that really, are they accurately paraphrasing them? Things like that, if I felt like there was a reason to do that. Now, we're not going to sit here and read through this whole article. Obviously, we can't do that in a webinar. But I do want to just point out also some of the headings that we see here. It's a typical research article. They did some kind of research. It looks like they probably went out and did some kind of a survey, and they got results with their survey. So they talk about their method, who are their participants, what kind of materials did they, what kind of measurement did they do? So it was probably some kind of, they asked people questions, yep. And then they discuss their results, and they're doing some kind of statistical analysis here. And then they're talking about, if we come down here, they do a whole discussion of what they found. And then, oh, that was like a whole other method. They did some other research with other methods. And then we have another discussion. And then they should get to eventually, after all these different things that they studied, their conclusions. So they're backing up what they're saying with some research that they actually went out and did, in other words. Again, this can get kind of sticky though. I would want to read it and see, are they using biased language or objective language? Sometimes that's pretty obvious when people are not using objective language, but sometimes it's not as obvious. And I know this is really difficult to talk about sometimes because we also bring our own bias to things. That was another thing that librarians were talking about lately, that, you know, we might see bias in an article. It's actually pretty rare, I think, to find bias in a peer-reviewed article. That's kind of what the peer review is for. That's one of the things that the peer reviewers look for is bias, and they will reject an article if it does have bias. So that's usually a safety net, I guess you would say, against bias. But there's another kind of bias that we might want to think about sometimes with evaluating a resource, and that's the bias that we bring to an article. So am I being overly harsh or skeptical of the facts being presented to me because of my own bias that I'm bringing to it? We don't talk about that a lot here. I don't think a lot of librarians do because it can be a little bit uncomfortable to talk about. But again, my wonderful example of dinosaurs having feathers, I know when I first read an article about that, reporting on that, it wasn't like a whole, you know, paleontology research article because I'm not in that field and I wouldn't understand the article probably if I read the research itself. But it was more like a news article from a science magazine. And even then, I was biased. I was like, well, but I had like toy dinosaurs growing up, and that doesn't fit my cognitive model of what a dinosaur is. That can't be right. I was really skeptical of it. So I was bringing my own bias of my beloved dinosaur toys to that resource, because that another example I have, this was, I think, hard for a lot of people who grew up, you know, and learning about the planets in school. And then when researchers said, well, really, Pluto doesn't fit the criteria for being a planet. I think some of us are maybe still having a hard time with that one. It's hard to not have your own personal bias sometimes, just have a knee-jerk reaction to research. So those are my safe examples. But we also want to, you know, just getting back to more basics, we also want to look at if the information that they are using can be verified. So again, usually that's the beauty of peer review, of using a resource that has been peer reviewed, is that the peer reviewers have made sure that the methods the researchers use could be duplicated, that somebody else could do the same study, that they're giving you adequate information so that someone else could duplicate the research and then make sure, you know, this is really how this is going to work out, and that the conclusions are following from that research. And then we already looked at the works cited. That's a really good thing to look for, that it is an authoritative source because they are citing whoever they are referencing. So this is, you know, a little bit more about the works cited. We would just want to look through maybe and make sure that those sources they're citing are also seemingly authoritative and factual and unbiased sources. So if anything jumps out at you like, oh, they're citing, you know, this one article a lot, and then you go down to the works cited and you read the title of the article and, oh, wow, that's really, you know, not objective language and it seems really biased, maybe you would want to go look up that article then and take a look at it. Again, usually you don't need to worry too much about this when it is a peer-reviewed resource because that's usually what the peer reviewers are doing. But there are things out there that are not peer-reviewed that you may end up needing to look at. And I really like to, at this point, you know, also mention we're not just talking about getting a good grade at Walden on a discussion post. These evaluation skills are really useful just in life to be a well-informed person. And in life, there's no requirement that you only look at peer-reviewed resources. So some of these skills and these questions are going to come more in handy, perhaps in other scenarios, even outside of Walden. All right, so these are just the questions kind of broken down. You know, who wrote it? What was the author's background? Could that author potentially be biased? You know, where are they affiliated? What university or where do they work? For instance, I know I've seen some, this used to be more of a problem, you know, some pharmaceutical research where, oh, look, that person, if you dig, you know, one of the people that's listed as an author actually works for a pharmaceutical company who has made that. So anyway, just things like that. How old is it? Could it have been, you know, added to or even disproven by more recent research? So if it's getting a little older, maybe you look and see if there's something newer, make sure it agrees still. Who is the intended audience? I didn't really talk about that too much yet, but I mentioned popular sources, or those more general sources that are for everyone. Is it intended for, is this, you know, in a science magazine that anybody would pick up in their doctor's office, or is this a really scholarly source that's peer reviewed and it might be, you know, full of jargon that I may not understand in paleontology, and does it cite sources? So we do have a link here to an evaluating resources guide, but I think we're going to hold off and show that at the end. So one other thing I wanted to show you before I hand it over to Kim is just, again, how to verify peer review. I went to Start Your Research to show you how to do that, but there's another way to do it I like to show, and that's right on the library homepage. If you just click on Search Everything, and you can't remember how to get there, you just type in Verify Peer Review, and what will come up is this quick answer. It's like a frequently asked question. How do I verify that my article is peer reviewed? And if you click on that, it'll link you right to that tool. So you don't have to go through Start Your Research. If you can't remember how to get there, you can just use that main search box, but you do have to change it back on the homepage to Search Everything. And as long as you remember what it is you want to do, you want to verify peer review, it'll get you there. So I said I would show you another way. That was the other way. And I'll pause right now and see if there are questions about anything I've talked about before I hand it over to Kim.
No, there aren't any questions. I think everyone
okay, great.
Following along. Yep, great.
I will go ahead and I will hand it off to you.
Great. And if you can just let me know when you see my screen.
Got it.
Awesome. Okay, so now that we know how to, Okay, so now that you know how to determine if a resource is accurate and reliable, the next thing you need to know is when you can use that resource. And the library has some recommendations to help you decide when to choose a certain type of resource over another. Before I get started, I just want to say that again, that these are recommendations and guidelines. You should always refer to your discussion post or your assignment instructions or your capstone rubric for specific requirements. And you'll understand a little bit more about that as I'm talking about some of these resources. So we're going to look at some resources. I'm going to talk about the different types of resources they are and when it may be appropriate to use them and when it may not be appropriate to use them. And the first one I'm going to talk about are books. So books are great. There's a lot of information in books. You know, they're bigger, so they can hold more information. But books are also older. It takes a while to go through the publication process. First, you have the author collecting the information, drafting it, editing it, going back and forth with the publishers. And then if it's a physical book, it has to be sent out, put together and bound and then sent out to the consumer. And this takes a lot of time. So obviously the material in there is going to age. So books are really good for things such as background information, general knowledge on information, and also history on topics. There's two different types of books I really want to talk about. Textbooks, which provide a broad coverage, and scholarly books, which provide a more in-depth coverage. So I just have two pictures of books up here, and one of them is a textbook, and one of them is a scholarly book. But you wouldn't know that from just looking at them. You would have to actually go in and open them up and see what is in there. I can tell you about this qualitative research textbook that I have here. The purpose of this book is to provide information on the concepts covered in that course that you're taking. So its purpose is to help you learn these concepts. So it's going to have a lot of coverage and just give you a little bit of information about everything. Textbooks are really good for background information, to give you those general ideas, to help you see what's out there for theories or maybe research design or methodology. This book here on qualitative research is going to give you a lot of information about different types of qualitative research. So it's going to talk about case studies, focus groups, interviews. I checked on this book and it has 15 pages on conducting an interview. So it's just a tiny, tiny part of this book. Now, the next book, Interviewing Groups and Individuals in Qualitative Market Research, is an example of a scholarly book because it's taking one thing and it's going really in depth. As opposed to the 15 pages of conducting an interview in the textbook, this book is 172 pages just on conducting interviews. So you're in the textbook, you read about qualitative research, a little bit about interviewing, you want to find out more about it, you can go and get a scholarly book on this. So scholarly books are great because they have that in-depth information, but they're also a great source for primary information on many theories. Many theorists have had their seminal or classic works published in a scholarly book. So that's where you can go and find those. Now, let's say your instructor is asking for a peer-reviewed source to support your weekly assignment. In this case, you would not go to a book because books are not considered peer review. They don't go through that process that Aaron was talking about before because that would just take way too long. They're already have to go through the publisher and the editor, but that's not considered the scholarly peer review that some of these scholarly journals have for their articles. So the next thing I want to talk to you about are journal articles. And this is where you're going to do most of your research in one area in here. But I want to mention that there's 3 different types of journals I'm going to talk about. And Aaron had covered some of these. We have your popular magazines, trade publications, and then your peer-reviewed scholarly journals. And all of these resources have their own characteristics and their own little niche in the publication world that makes them each an important resource for different reasons. So you might want to use a popular magazine for something where you might want to use a peer-reviewed for another. So when do we use these? Well, let's talk a little bit about some popular magazines. Popular magazines are great for current information and also the popular opinion of a topic. And I'm talking about magazines such as Time or Newsweek. I'm not talking about tabloids or gossip magazines. And I'm just going to pop out and show you the website for Time Magazine. So you can see this Time Magazine covers a broad range of topics. We have politics, world news, health, entertainment, business, and it's just going to talk about what is happening today. So it's very current. It's good for finding current information. It's published bi-weekly, so sometimes when a story comes out and they're reporting on it, in 2 weeks they're going to have more information to report on about it, so they're going to be able to provide additional information to keep you up to date on what's going on. It's also good for looking at opposing opinions on events and things that are happening in the world. There's some editorials, some people writing in, and they're showing one side of a story as well as the other. But you have to be careful. This is when those questions that Erin was talking about can come up to play again. You want to start asking questions about biases, about of a bias coming from the writer, or if they have maybe an agenda, or the actual publisher might have be sponsored by a private organization, and they may have their own agenda when they're publishing these magazines. So you have to just be a little bit careful about that. It's also important to remember that their main purpose is to entertain. This is what you're going to find at the doctor's office. So you can pick it up and browse through it while you're waiting for your appointment or when you're getting your hair done. You want to make sure, since it's for entertainment, you want to make sure that you're checking for accuracy. If they're making statements, are they telling you where they're getting it from, or at least pointing you in a direction where you can go and find out if that information is correct. The next type of journal I want to talk about are trade journals. And this is an example of a trade journal called Nursing Times. And the purpose of a trade journal is to inform the reader about things going on in this field. So many different fields, education, nursing, business, they all have trade journals. This is a great place to find background information. It's also a great place to find emerging trends or a developing research in your area. You want to go and look and see what they're talking about. A lot of them have news links. Some of them have blogs where you can see what's going on. Look at the advertisements. A lot of professional organizations advertise their conferences in trade journals. And these conferences that these professional organizations are hosting, people pay money to go to them because they want to learn what's new. They want to find out emerging trends and what's going on in their field. So these advertisements for upcoming conferences are going to have the most interesting things going on right now in the field. And these are things you guys want to be aware of. You want to know what's going on, especially if you're doing a doctoral or project study, doctoral study or project study. You want to be able to know what's going on in your area. This might even be a great place to set up a journal alert. And on the slide, there's a link to the guide that talks about setting up journal alerts, where whenever Nursing Times is going to publish a new issue, they'll just send you an email with a table of contents and links to any articles that are going to be coming out in their next issue, so you can go and look at those. That's some of the reasons you might want to use a trade journal, but you might not be able to use this for discussions, posts, assignments, or your capstone research, because trade journals are typically not peer-reviewed. So if your assignment guide or your rubric says you need peer-reviewed scholarly articles, then you're not going to get that out of a trade journal. And that brings me to the third example, the peer-reviewed scholarly journal. And I'm just going to pull up here the American Journal of Education. And look at this. This is their website. When you access the journal articles, you're going to be accessing them through the database. But I just want to show you what their online presence looks like. And then go over here and look at the Time online presence. Look at the difference. This is flashy, it's attractive, you want to click on the buttons, you want to see what's going on. This, not so much. They're about business. You know, they're talking about the volume and the number of their issues so that you can find the articles you're looking for. They're talking about upcoming items, how to contribute, and about what this what this journal is all about. This is where you're going to do the majority of your research and coursework when you're relying on these peer-reviewed articles. You're going to be getting them from journals like this. They're going to take up a large percentage of your literature review as well. What they're not good at, they're not a good source for background information. These articles are written to a specific audience. Remember what Erin was talking about when she was talking about those questions that you're asking. You can tell when you're reading these articles that they are expecting the people who are reading them to already know what's going on, to be familiar with the background, to have that information already so they can just learn about the new research that's emerging right now. And if you wanted to know more about peer review, I know Erin had spoken about it earlier, and I'm talking about it now. The last webinar that we did in this Evaluating Resources series was had peer review in it. It was called the 3 Ps of evaluation, and one of those Ps is peer review. And there's a link to that recording of that webinar, I think on the 3rd slide of this slide deck. So if you haven't downloaded it now, you might want to go ahead and do that. Okay, and this is the link right here to set up a journal alert if you're interested in learning how to do that. Okay, so now when should we use these things? Newspapers, encyclopedias, and dissertations. Well, newspapers are great, obviously, for current information. They're published every day. However, that also brings a little problem because they may also be the most flawed because they're publishing information, but they might not have all that information. They're just publishing what they have. So you have to be careful to make sure what you're reading, it just might not be accurate. It's not that they might not be telling you the truth, it's just they don't have all that information yet. But what newspapers are also really good for is local information. If you are looking at something in your area or in your community, you're going to want to go to where it's being reported, where you can find that information. And that's probably not going to be in a peer-reviewed journal. I also want to talk about encyclopedias and dissertations, but before I really get into them, I'm just going to pop back out to the library homepage, and I want to go right here, and I'm going to show you how you can find articles in newspapers, encyclopedias, and dissertations. And we're just going to go up to this Start Your Research, and Erin went here before to find Ulrich's Verify Peer Review, and we'll click on that. And then when it's under Search by Type, we have all the different types that we're talking about. So here is a link to searching by newspapers or magazines, and if you click on that, you can see you can search in a newspaper or magazine, but it also tells you how to find newspapers and magazines in the library databases. Excuse me. There's also a link here for searching encyclopedias, so I want to open that up and talk a little bit about information that you'll find in encyclopedias. Encyclopedias are great for background information and great for overview of a general topic. If there's something in your coursework that you may not understand, you can just go out to an encyclopedia, and this is a fabulous place to find information on that topic. The Walden Library has a great database called Sage Knowledge, and I'll just pop that open. Encyclopedias are really good for filling in the gap also between a textbook and a scholarly book. So let's say you're in a management class and your textbook is talking about all these different theories, and one thing they mention is impression management theory, and you think, well, that sounds interesting, but I'm not sure, I need to know more information. So let's just go out and type that in, impression management theory, and we'll put that in our encyclopedia database, and we're going to get a list of results about impression management theory. So now this isn't going to be everything about it, but it's going to be a little bit more information. It takes this information, excuse me, and it gives you a very succinct, concise explanation about it. So this is a good place to go if you're looking for a little bit more information on a topic. You can also sometimes use encyclopedias if you're asked in an assignment to find a scholarly definition. However, you definitely need to double check because sometimes you're asked to get a scholarly definition from a peer-reviewed source, and encyclopedias are not peer-reviewed. So you have to double check to make sure that it would be an appropriate place to get a definition. But encyclopedias have a lot of information on the research process, and you can learn a lot just from going in there and seeing what they have. Now I want to talk about dissertations. And dissertations, we're going to access that the same way we accessed Ulrich's, the newspapers, and encyclopedias, by clicking on Start Your Research, and then under Search by Type, we're going to click on Dissertations. And dissertations, I think, are in a category all by themselves. We'll go into the Walden Dissertation Database. As a librarian, I think dissertations are extremely important for your research, but generally you may not be able to use them. Well, generally you're not able to use them, especially in something such as like a dissertation or a project study, because they are not peer-reviewed. Again, there's always exceptions. You have to double check your rubric, you have to double check your assignment instructions and guidelines to make sure. But dissertations are a great place for you to go and find other information. It's a great learning experience. You can search dissertations by degree. So I can search for just EDDs by typing EDD and then clicking degree. We can search by topic. So I'm interested in higher education. And we can also search by advisors or authors. And I can just type that person's name in here and then add him to my search. Oops. This keeps moving on me. All right. Oh no, it wasn't working. There we go. And so now I have dissertations from my degree on my topic that my advisor advised on. And I can go in here and see what theories they used, what different type of research design they used. I can go and see how they organized it. But one of the greatest things that I can do, if I get something very recent, I can go in and just click on, let me see if I have a recent one. Well, this one isn't recent, but I'm just going to use it as an example. Oh, there it is. You can click on the references, and it'll bring up all the references that this person used. Again, this is not that current, this was 2015, but if you find one that was just published last year or even the beginning of this year, there can be a lot of resources in there that you could use for your own research. Now, dissertations are not a great place to go for background information. Again, they are assuming that you understand the topic. They're explaining gap in the literature or a gap in practice, and they're showing how their studies filling that gap in. And also, as I mentioned, they are not peer-reviewed. So if you need a peer-reviewed source, you would not be able to cite a dissertation. But you can come to their reference list and use something from here if it's applicable, if it's peer-reviewed and if it's current, you will be able to use it in your whatever your assignment is that you're looking for. So that brings us back to everything I had to cover. I did have a poll that I wanted to try, just some questions to see if maybe you guys were, if you could help answer these. All right, so I have two polls for you, and this is the first one. Your weekly assignment needs 5 recent peer-reviewed articles to support your analysis. Where would you go to find those articles? I'm just going to let this go for a little bit.
And you actually want to click right on your answer. Sometimes people haven't gotten to do a poll yet on one of these webinars before, so I always like to let them know just to actually click right on the one that you want to choose.
All right. Well, it looks like everyone got that one right, so I'm just going to close that. So very good job. And
in case people didn't answer it, what was the right answer?
The right answer was the peer-reviewed journal.
Woohoo! Yes, good job.
Ooh, good job.
Everybody who participated got it right.
All right, so let me go like that. I guess we can talk about the next webinar in this series that's coming out. That's going to be next month on August 7th at 9 p.m. It's on what about the stuff I find on the internet, knowing when to use and trust what you find on the internet. And this is a direct link if any of you would like to register for that webinar.
Excellent. I am going to go ahead and stop the recording, but we will have plenty of time for questions. So I'll go ahead and stop that now.
Great.